and welcome to another episode of the TRC podcast. This is episode number 13, where we discuss the events of briefly Watkins Glen and then Daytona. I'm your host, Jake. With me is my co-host, head analyst, friend Ryan of RJM Analytics. And back with us again after some time off is Adam, our other main kind of statistician and analyst from our community. It's good to have you back, Adam. And I guess you guys can pretty much just start wherever you want to, because we've had, once again, 2 races since the last time we were on, which I imagine will primarily focus on Daytona, because that's where most of the real action happened and the relevant stuff. But we did have a race at Watkins Glen too that was pretty interesting, at least for half of it. So I'll pass the floor over to Ryan. What's on your mind?
A lot to unpack here. I guess start with just kind of stating the obvious that yesterday and the whole weekend, the Xfinity race too, was just type of weekend even by Daytona standards, it's like you cannot take those results seriously at all. People do. But it's hard to think of exactly where this falls on the list of flukish Mickey Mouse wins, but one guy or maybe 2 guys being able to get through a wreck caused by rain that wiped out everybody else, that would be pretty high on the list to me. Probably wasn't quite as bad as I would say like Justin Haley's win 3 years ago, when it was getting through a wreck and then everybody else pitted, and he stayed out and then won because of the lightning clock. But it was pretty, you might as well just put all the numbers into a bingo wheel and then spin it. And so, and then the Xfinity race was, I don't even know what that was. That wasn't even rain. That was just everybody forgetting how to drive, and then Jeremy Clements winning because NASCAR decided to throw a caution for something that didn't need to be a caution, and end the race on the last lap. And I will never forgive them for doing that when Timmy Hill could have won that race, or Brandon Brown. Clements is fine, but he got his great underdog win a couple of years ago. Timmy might never get that chance again. And Brandon, come on, he deserves something good more than just about anybody in Xfinity. With the fact that his win, was kind of became, that the win ended up not really being the prime focus. Just your typical Daytona week. And now we've got playoffs to talk about.
Well, my takeaway from this is that, and look, I say this as someone who really enjoys super speedway racing, and I probably like it more than most people, but this weekend was pretty indefensible. I think both races were just complete shit shows to the point of, it almost makes me wish that the Daytona 400 weekend didn't even exist. I'd almost rather they move the second Daytona race somewhere else, because this is going on a decade plus where we wreck 2/3 of the field or more every single time this race is held. And I think I saw a stat that 87% of the field wrecked yesterday, and that's kind of just the way Daytona is now, and I'm pretty tired of it.
Cindric was like the only non-shitbox car that didn't get involved in a wreck.
That's what I heard, yes. Because even Dylan got spun out and was going backwards, through the pits. So, I think it's almost to the point where it's hurting NASCAR's credibility to continue running these type of races that are just a circus, and the results can't be taken seriously. I mean, it's more of a spectacle than a race. And, I think that entertainment is important, and I think it is good that NASCAR is concerned with entertaining the fans, but this just takes it too far to one direction. And I would like to see, especially now that we have Atlanta being a much better version of what Daytona used to be, kind of. I wish we could find a way to deal with this, but I'm really not sure if they'll change anything at this point, and I kind of doubt the drivers will ever stop driving like maniacs, especially with the current playoff format. It kind of encourages it. So, yeah, I'm kind of just glad the weekend is over and we can go back to real racing at Darlington next week.
Yeah, this race.
Somebody brought it up in the chat earlier this week that they should just move. Atlanta's going to have 2 races. Move the second one to being the regular season finale, and then if the Daytona 400 has to exist at all, put it on the 4th of July where it belongs.
Yes, I would love that. I mean, that's actually Merv and I were talking about that. I think that would make sense for the schedule when you think about it, because it's like then Daytona can get their traditional date back. That'll make a lot of fans happy, and then the cutoff race will be much more legitimate while still being exciting and edge of your seat action for the fans. So I think that would be a great solution, but I kind of doubt it happening.
Yeah, we haven't really heard anything about the schedule for next year, and it's like usually out by now. All we know is the Chicago Street Course. Supposedly Texas is getting moved to spring and not going to have the All-Star race anymore, and other than that, I'm kind of not really expecting a whole lot.
I don't think we're going to see any new tracks this year except for the Chicago Street Course. And that's okay. I mean, they made a shitload of changes the last few years, so I'm okay with a few years of stability, but yeah.
Anyway.
And then one other thing, I mean, I don't want to steal Jake's thunder here, but, I mean, the rain, Paul, I think what bothers me about it is not so much what happened at Daytona, but the fact that Watkins Glen was not run in the pouring rain, and that probably would have been a classic race had they just run in the rain. Even with standing water on the track, maybe it would have been a little much, but Watkins Glen was much better in the rain than it was in the dry, and I feel like we kind of got robbed of a full-length rain race because NASCAR, I don't really know why they insisted on waiting it out, but that's what frustrates me more than Daytona.
Yeah, it's definitely, and somebody pointed that out this morning too. It's like you wouldn't let them race in rain on a track where you can race in the rain, and then yesterday starts pouring in turn 1. All the spotters were saying it. People at the track were saying it. There were videos uploaded, and just let them race right into it and total the entire field except for 2 guys. So, yeah, it's just, if they're going to preach safety like they do, the car that supposedly takes harder hits than the last one, that was kind of, it seems like this was kind of really lazily, half-assed put together. You got a guy right now sitting out because of concussion issues whose career, for all we know, might be over because of it. And you're going to pretend you care about safety, and then the type of bullshit we saw yesterday happens. And, yeah. Back to Watkins Glen, though, for a minute, I think, since we were just talking about that. I think we don't really need to talk about the finish there, but I did think that was another pretty good race. And the one thing I wanted to touch on from that was Todd Gilliland. I thought had a really, really great run there going. And, for all people talk about Michael McDowell's overachieving so much, I go on about him a lot to kind of be the devil's advocate there, but that's because Front Row is a really good team that people don't realize how good they are, especially on road courses. And it's a shame that Gilliland had to have that mechanical issue that dropped him from leading the race to last, or pretty close to last, and because he could have run top 5 that whole race, I think. So, and then the announcement this week that Zane Smith is going to run some Cup races for them next year. I'm definitely interested to see how he does and how if he eventually ends up in a third car there full time, or and then see how he and Todd both keep progressing. And I think we can really kind of get rid of this myth that front row is some sort of underfunded underdog team. Okay. So anyway, though, we don't really need to cover much else about the Glen. So I think playoffs. Ryan Blaney is in. Austin Dillon is in. Martin Truex is out. And we can kind of debate over who deserves to be there, who doesn't, whether or not it's fair about Truex being 4th in points and not making the playoffs. But I think the one positive thing I'll say is that we didn't get we didn't have something like a Chris Buescher in 2016, somebody who's only not even gonna have a chance to make the second round type of driver. Dillon's probably the worst driver in there, but I mean, even he will have these top 10 runs at times. Generally, I think this is one of the more competitive playoff fields that we've had in some time, even if Truex isn't there, and even if other guys like Eric Jones, who've been top 16 drivers in performance this year, aren't there, and then Kurt, obviously, is not there. So, what are you guys' takes on just how that all ended up shaking out?
The playoffs or the race itself, or what?
I mean, either, I guess.
Well, first I'll just talk about the race. We already covered the Glen. There's not really a whole lot to say there. I mean, other than, first half of that was really good when it was in the rain. Second half was just typical road course racing we've seen this year. Like Adam said, not much more to really go on about. I think Gilliland was the only real big story of that race. As far as Daytona goes, I mostly agree with what you guys said. It was pretty much very reminiscent of the last two Daytona 400-mile races that we've had, only this one was during the day, where they were really good races for probably about 90% of it. And then, as it always does, just like clockwork at Daytona, in the last, 10, 20% of the race, it just devolved into a total circus. And like Adam said, this was actually, I read it yesterday, this was the second most destructive modern Daytona race behind, I forget which 500 it was. It might have been 2019. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it was 2019.
Yeah, that was 90%. This one had 87% that were involved in an incident. It's a shame that it always seems to have to go that way at Daytona because, I literally can't even remember the last Cup race there or even any series, really, that didn't end up like that. But, at this point, I think we're all so used to it that it's hardly even any skin off of us when it does. We were just kind of hoping for, I guess, good results for our drivers and playoff-wise. And as far as that goes, it sucks that Truex missed it because obviously, I don't think anybody with any sense would deny that he was, a top 16 driver this year. Even if the points themselves did overrate his year, he certainly deserved to be in the playoffs or chase, whatever you want to call it. But it's better, I'll say, that he missed than it would have been Ryan Blaney missing, which, I'm not some big Blaney stan, as people here know, but it would have been absolutely absurd if he had missed it. It would have made Jamie McMurray in 2004 or Tony Stewart in 2006 look like, it would have made them look like horrible seasons in comparison because this, Ryan Blaney is having one of the best winless seasons so far of anybody in the last decade. And he's been doing it for a Penske team that's been fairly slow, and so not every race they've been slow, but for a fair amount of the season they've been lagging somewhat behind, like the other two top 2 or 3 teams. And so I, on one hand, I was relieved that he made it because I think he was the guy that really would have been just a travesty if he hadn't made it. But, it is lame that Truex got bumped out for a guy like Austin Dillon that really done almost nothing out of maybe 3 or 4 races the whole season, and especially the way he did it. But, it's like Merb was talking about in the chat, it's just kind of a necessary evil or result of this really great parity we've had this season, which we all love to see. And so, as unfair as it is, I'm willing to kind of accept it just for the fact that this is a historical season that we're having. I mean, we need to, step back and try to appreciate this year as much as we can because, we really did have 16 winners. Like we used to always joke, like, there's no way there's going to be 16 winners or 17 winners. This is crazy. It's never going to happen. That's never going to be a concern when it comes to the playoffs. And holy crap, we actually had 16 winners in 26 races. Like, that's historic. And if I had to guess, we're probably not going to see another season like this anytime soon. So we do need to appreciate that. But as far as the race goes, like, again, it was a 9 out of 10 race for me until the last, 40 laps. But, like I said, I'm used to the crap at Daytona now. And, I'll just let the other guys to talk about the move that Austin Dillon made or whatever and that other stuff because I don't really care that much to talk about it. It was just like a mini 2018 Daytona 500 move. But that's what I have to say about it.
Well, so the way I have kind of conditioned myself to look at the playoffs is to just realize that it's a gimmick. It's not necessarily going to be fair. And frankly, it doesn't have to mean a whole lot to us if we choose to not let it. And that's kind of the track I'm taking is that, yes, it's obviously very unfair that Dillon is in over Truex, but I'm not really upset about it because I've just kind of decided I'm not going to worry about the playoffs. I'm not going to worry about the points. I'm just going to enjoy each race for what it is, and I'm going to use my own stats and common sense to evaluate the driver performance on my own, regardless of what the points and playoff system says. So in that sense, it wasn't a big deal. But I do think going forward, it would be preferable if they did like top 10 in points and then 6 wild cards, or even top 12 in points and 4 wild cards, or just something that locks in, very consistent winless drivers like Truex and Blaney. But like Ryan said, I do think it's actually a strong playoff field this year, and none of the drivers in it are automatic first round exits, despite what some people may think. And yeah, like what you guys were saying, if say, I don't know, Harrison Burton had caught the rain at the right time and won this race, he would be a complete waste of space in the playoffs. But Austin Dillon is at least tolerable to be there. And as far as the race goes, I agree with Jake that most of the Daytona races in recent memory have been fantastic action until they become wreck fest. And this race actually reminded me a lot of 2019 in that race was great until the big one and the rain and the lightning came. And this was much the same. And that's really how it's been pretty much for the last decade or so. And so, yeah, I kind of just try to enjoy the exciting parts of it and not get too upset when the inevitable happened at the end. As far as I just don't really even care about the Dillon Cindric thing because they were the only 2 non-shitbox cars left that didn't really have any damage. And it's like, one of them was going to win, and neither of them really deserved to win based on everything that happened before the rain wreck. So it was kind of going to be a BS result no matter what. So whatever, it is what it is.
Yeah, I think there was definitely part of me at the end of that who was hoping we would get some totally, completely WTF winner like J. McLeod or Landon Castle. Castle actually in the car that on the 2019 race, which he could have won if it were one lap earlier. That would have been some nice karma, I guess. But I don't know. Both weird cars up there too. Jake was really pulling for Cody at the end. So yeah, I mean, it's just your typical Austin Dillon type of win. He's like at this point the new Ryan Newman, who would just get these wins at the most random times in the most random ways, and there's just kind of have to tolerate them because they're not going to happen that often, and that's kind of all there is to it. I think kind of expand upon what Adam just said, though, about just kind of the whole fairness of the playoffs. That's I think really ever since I've been doing all this stuff with analytics, it's kind of like we have our own way of sort of rating drivers over the course of the season now, and just the actual points and the actual results mean that much less to me. I mean, obviously, I mean something. I would never say that NASCAR should, not make them matter at all. But it's like when it comes to just how you rate drivers over the course of a season or over the course of their careers, it's like you can kind of take a lot of these results with a grain of salt because we have these more precise ways to rate these drivers. And when someone like Truex misses the playoffs, I'm like, right, he should be there, but at the same time, does that mean he has the 17th best season? Of course not. And in a way, it's kind of like you almost want stuff like this to sometimes happen because it just, if every single driver finished every single race the position that they run in, there was no randomness at all or no predictability, that would be really boring. We've had seasons like that where it's been really boring because there was no 2018 obviously comes to mind. Every single race, it seemed like, played out totally naturally. It just wasn't exciting. The racing wasn't good. Parity sucked. Then, especially because you had Chase Elliott and Kyle Larson stuck in really, really slow Chevys. Probably the worst Chevy has ever had in my time watching NASCAR. They might have very well been just as good as the guys who were winning all the races that year if they'd had faster equipment, as we've seen they're capable of ever since then. And the guy who wins the championship is literally not even a top 5 driver of the season performance-wise. So, I think to have that sort of factor in the playoffs where you know that it's not just going to be a cakewalk and you have to earn it. Nobody's going to 2003 Matt Kenseth this field, which was a classic season where there was a lot of parity, but we just didn't see it because one guy totally stroked his way to the championship. But I think, like Adam said, you just kind of enjoy the races for what they are, and you forget about the whole gimmick thing. And at the end of the day, the champion isn't always the guy who had the best season. It hasn't been like that in any format. It just is what it is.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to add. Just wanted to say one thing. I would be more outraged about it if it was a situation where you had some guy kind of in mid-pack equipment that was overachieving and scraping to make the chase, and he'd done what he needed to do besides winning to get in, and then he got knocked out by something like this. Because there is an importance factor to it in the case that, there are people's jobs, sometimes are put on the line for stuff like this. And Like sponsors literally, they sometimes will make decisions based on things like this. I mean, I know that it's happened in the past where, sponsors have ducked out on drivers, when they didn't make the chase or they didn't meet a certain criteria or whatnot. But thankfully, in this case, that wasn't what happened. I mean, obviously, it stings for Truex, but it's not really like I think he was a serious threat to win the championship. And, he's going to be back next year and have the same car, all the same sponsors and all that. So for that reason, it's easier to stomach for me.
Yeah, like if it were Eric Jones, for instance, who is having really great season for what's probably pack equipment, that, and he had missed the playoffs like that, he maybe wouldn't have been fourth in points, but if there had been one less winner this year and, he was on the cut line like that, yeah, that would hurt. But it's like, really, at the end of the day, who really cares? Truex was probably not going to win the championship anyway. He deserved to win the championship unless he really turned it on in the last 10 races. Like, okay, so he's going to finish 17th in points now. I mean, is there that big of a difference between that and 6th or wherever?
No, and I think in the modern, in the playoff era, nobody cares about points finishes except for the champion. Like, nobody remembers. Like, I mean, other than a few just ones that stick out for whatever reason, I have no idea who finished where in points from 2014 to 2021 because it doesn't matter. And I think if the drivers and teams are being honest, it probably barely even matters to them other than the money. So, you kind of have to just realize that it's there for entertainment and it's not to be taken too seriously. And, the one thing I will give NASCAR credit for is that the elimination style playoffs definitely increase the urgency of certain situations, and it forces drivers to perform under pressure, which I really like. Like Ryan was saying, we're never going to have just a stroker season to the championship where there's no pressure on somebody to perform at the end. And that I'm glad for. It's been fun seeing drivers in must-win situations and seeing how they deal with it and how the pressure affects them.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I guess it's okay.
Yeah, that's an interesting. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's all I have to say.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I will offer kind of one counterpoint to that. Like, I think what you're saying is partially true. My counter on that would be, though, like, in a way, like, that's true, but in another way, I would almost say that it offers kind of a bailout to drivers in the fact that, in the old chase, before you had, like, the eliminations, you had a situation where if a driver had, like, a couple of bad races or whatever and got so far behind, I mean, they were done anyways. Like, this system kind of just puts, like, it just puts like an insult factor on it, basically. Just slaps a label on it and says, okay, yes, you're officially done now. Like, it's just kind of like there, I guess, for humiliation factor, but it's not really any different in the sense that, you were boned in the old system once you got a couple of bad races and you were, however many points behind. But it also offers a bailout that you kind of didn't used to have, where in the past, let's say you got, I don't know, maybe 2 races and points behind, and then you won a race, but it probably only gained you like 20 points, and maybe you're still 1.5 whole races behind. But here, like, you can have 2 bad races in a round and, be completely out of it, and then win the race, and then suddenly you're golden again. And so that's, I guess you could say, an intriguing aspect of it. I'm not sure whether I like it or not, to be honest, but that's the aspect that, I can get behind that more than I can the winner take all at that last race, which I think we all agree that that's the most ridiculous part of it, the most, just one of the most asinine things I've ever heard of, where, literally nothing that happens in the last 35 races matters, only the result in the last. But, we could go on and on about that all day, and maybe we will in another episode, but, that's is what it is. But, I think that this chase system is actually more forgiving than the previous one was.
Well, and just to
all right, you go ahead.
Yeah, just to make a counterpoint to your counterpoint, I think though, like the scenario of say a driver having 2 bad races and then winning, like what that really is usually is having 2 bad results from bad luck and then winning to be able to offset the bad luck. Like that happened in 2014 and 15 with Kevin Harvick, I think. Yeah, and it's like to me I would rather give drivers the ability to win their way out of bad luck than to have 1 or 2 unfortunate breaks just doom their championship hopes. Well, like 2008, for example, I think it would have been cool if Carl Edwards had a chance to say, win his way back into championship contention after he had the mechanical failure at Charlotte.
Or Kyle Busch. I mean, Kyle Busch had 2 or 3 bad races at the start of that chase that really weren't even his fault after he had absolutely was like Gordon 1998 level, and then 2 races back, he was done.
Yeah, so in that sense, I like the forgiveness of it because it's forgiving in a way that rewards people who perform under pressure. It's not forgiving in the sense of letting people coast.
It helps the cream rise to the top, I think. Johnson, during that whole stretch, was never really the most consistent driver all year, but it wasn't always because it was his fault, he didn't have the most consistent results. It was usually because the team would be experimenting for the playoffs or whatever, but he would always have usually the highest highs of any driver. He would always be the most dominant at the races he dominated. Kevin Harvick in 2014-15 is another example. He led like 2,000 or so laps both those years. 2014, he didn't end up winning the full season points title, but clearly, just the eye test would have told you he was the most dominant driver that year. Chase in 2020, I think, is maybe a more borderline example, but luck was terrible for pretty much the entire season until the last couple races. And his equipment was probably not as good as Stuart Haas or Joe Gibbs that year. And so I think in sort of a reverse psychological way, I think the playoffs a lot of times gives us a more deserving champion than full season points would.
Yeah, it's as weird as that sounds, I actually agree with that. It's like when you look at seasons like 2007, which we will not beat that dead horse, but it's a good example of, if there's a big luck disparity over the first 26 races between the best drivers, the playoffs is a nice reset to make sure that it's not just based on who had the least bad finishes during the season. And I like that.
Yeah, we had that discussion. I think it was after Nashville, where we talked about I like the idea and the principle of having a full season championship, and I think it's much preferable to the chase. But you still would need to have a far better points by points race system than we have now, which is just ridiculous. But we already went over that in that episode, so there you go.
And I think before I was doing my analytics, I was doing custom point systems where what ended up becoming the basis for the average running position points was basically the whole point system just for results. And pretty much all those years, I think Kevin Harvick won it in 2010, but that was like the only season where a guy won with consistency. All the others were... Johnson still won just about every one of his title seasons, except maybe 2008 and 2016, obviously. Harvick won 2014, I know that. So yeah, it's like he just rewarded dominance more than he would solve so many of these problems. Anyway, I think for this year... Oh, first off, I'll just say really quick, I thought there's a lot of sort of controversy over Kurt Busch pulling out of the playoffs, and people thought it might have been just because, to help Truex get in, that maybe Gibbs sort of ordered it. But, so I'm definitely glad that didn't end up playing out that way, and also with Blaney getting in, I'm glad that wasn't just because like Logano, who was multiple laps down, he could have just pulled off the track and tended to have an issue to gain Blaney a spot, and so I'm glad that didn't happen. You know, we don't need another spin gate, and we don't need NASCAR to completely overreact to something and change the whole system again, make it even worse. So yeah, I'm glad things played out as naturally as they could have, I guess, and despite the rain caution that could have been completely avoided. We've got a really exciting playoffs, I think, to look ahead to now.
Yeah, I was going to just ask, like, did you want to do, like, a statistical, like, recap of the season so far, or did you want to just look ahead more to the chase, or what, or?
Well, I think, I'm not really sure what can be predicted for the playoffs based on my metrics. I guess the best bet is that Chase is the favorite, obviously, but this season is just so close behind him that it's like you can't really tell a whole lot from the metrics. I mean, I think usually they're pretty good at being predictive, but right now we've got Joey Logano is able to leapfrog everybody to second, actually in the full season points as well as in ETDR, by getting the highest score yesterday. He was the only driver with an average running position better than 10th. And he is barely ahead of Blaney. Then it's Chastain, Larson, Busch, Truex, Hamlin, Reddick. They're all basically... There's 11 drivers right now between 120 and 140. And then there's Chase at 153. So it's like... It's a total cluster of guys who could either make it to the championship round or could be first round eliminations. And I guess the other thing I've been kind of working with, I just updated last night, is my luck chart. I still don't really have a formula for that I love. I pretty much base it from caution flag pass differential as well as the difference between average running position and finishing position. But I mean, it always skews it so that drivers who run up front more inherently are unluckier because they have more positions they lose when something happens to them that's not their fault. So I think Harvick was like the only playoff driver who was actually top 16 in points, who came out on the lucky side. Austin Dillon has been the luckiest driver this year, which should be no surprise. But yeah, it's kind of a work in progress, and I'm not really sure what can be taken away from it in terms of how luck is going to balance out. I think I will say, and I hate to say this because I can't stand the guy, but I think the guy everybody's kind of sleeping on in the playoffs is Hamlin, because he has been, over the past couple of months, one of the fastest drivers on most of the intermediates, and very unlucky for a lot of the year. And you just have to think, if they just put a bunch of good races together, that he could be a factor. I don't think he would win the championship because he's a habitual choker, and also because Phoenix is not one of Gibbs' best tracks this year. They weren't good there in the spring. Just that type of track seems like one of their weaknesses. But yeah, I think he's probably a sleeper, and Logano as well. I think Logano's got that whole even year, odd year thing where it's like every other year he makes it. So Ski at Phoenix is always really good, and so if he or Ryan Blaney make it there, then they're going to be scary. But I would like to think that as we were talking about, the cream will rise to the top, and Chase will get his second title in 3 years. If not, then all the other usual suspects, Larson, Kyle Busch, could easily bounce back. It's going to be totally wide open, I think.
Yeah, to what you're saying, I don't really think that there's any particular stat that can predict what's going to happen in the playoffs, because there's just too much randomness, and one oddball race can throw off the entire thing, and that's okay. I mean, I think basically the way I look at it is the best drivers overall are the most likely to get through it all and make it to the Final Four. I mean, that's obviously not groundbreaking to say, but there's always going to be a luck factor that makes it so lesser drivers could sneak through under the right circumstances, but the faster drivers on average will tend to make it. Just so right now I'm on DraftKings looking at their odds to win the championship, and Chase Elliott is by far the biggest favorite at better than 3-1. So they definitely think that he's a step above everybody else. And then Larson is second, and Hamlin is third in odds, which plays into what Ryan was saying. And it looks like about 11 of the 16 drivers have better than 20-1 shot, and then there's 5 that are considered hopeless. So, yeah, I think it's pretty wide open, but Chase is definitely the clear favorite. I mean, he doesn't really have any weaknesses at any of the tracks in the playoffs, so unless bad luck strikes him down. Wait, which one?
Texas is there. He's never been in Texas.
Oh, that's true. That is true. But he has enough playoff points that he can afford a bad race and probably not have any issue advancing. So, I mean, look, after Harvick in 2020, you can never say anybody is a lock for the Final Four, but I think Elliott is as close to a lock as you can get. And then the rest of the other 3 are really up in the air. And I honestly don't have much of an inkling as to who's going to make it, which is kind of fun.
Yeah, I think it's fun too.
The best thing I can say is just in terms of trying to predict who would make it. Whole luck chart that I have, I can kind of tilt it on its axis a little bit to make it, give it kind of a trend line. And the guys who would come out on top if I tilted on its axis a bit would be Chase, Blaney, and let me see. I'm actually literally doing this right now as I'm talking. Yeah, Blaney, Logano, and Hamlin, which, again, I really hope I'm wrong with this, but it seems like just because he doesn't have that many top 10s, nobody's really talking about him. But yeah, if that team gets hot, easily could make the Final Four. So I think the one guy who I'm kind of not expecting to make it that far, that's been a favorite all season, is Ross Chastain.
Well, I mean, that's an obvious one.
Because everybody's pissed at him and everybody's going to want to get in his head. But also, he's just very inexperienced and doesn't seem like really has that championship pedigree yet, I guess. And I don't know, it just kind of seems like he's maybe a year or 2 away from being a legitimate title threat.
Yeah, I wanted to. Well, I'll kind of talk about like all of them, like briefly, like touch on all of them, but I'll address that one first. I mean, I think everyone kind of thinks that he's like the pretender and all this, and even though I like him, I kind of have to agree with that because, yes, I mean, obviously the enemies that he's made is one thing. Like if I had to guess, I would say that he'll probably go out in the second round. That Hamlin will either take him out at either Talladega or the Roval. But even if not, he's been struggling recently, and because where earlier in the season he was kind of just taking other guys out and was still managing to get good finishes himself. He's really been overdriving a lot recently and getting caught up in his own incidents. Like he's been recently screwing himself more than he has like the guys that he's been running into. And Junior was actually talking about it yesterday during the rain delay about he pretty much just basically said in a polite way that Trackhouse have kind of gone back to being somewhat pretenders. Maybe that's being too harsh, but they're still contenders, but they're definitely not at the level that they were earlier. And, unfortunately, again, as someone who kind of likes Ross, he's kind of been showing himself to be a paper tiger recently because he's had, which again, results are not everything. We talk about that. That's like a theme of our show. But he's had 6 straight finishes outside the top 15, I believe. But the biggest thing is that out of those, only 2 of those has he really been fast at any portion. Like there was Pocono and then the start of Richmond before he just completely fell apart about 100 laps into that event. And so, I would be shocked if he makes the Final Four. I'd like to see it, but for several different reasons, I'd be shocked if he made it. As far as Hamlin goes, this is probably going to make you mad, but, I have to say it. Honestly, Hamlin this year kind of gives me Jimmy Johnson 2016 vibes. Like, I really did not think about that until maybe about, when you were talking about it 10 minutes ago, and then it just kind of hit me. He has 2 wins so far, just like Jimmy did. He's had the same kind of thing where he's been really good in his fast races, but he's also had a really good number of putrid races. And they primarily were concentrated kind of in like the early spring and early summer, but he's definitely been consistently a lot faster in the last month and a half. And he's definitely a threat, but I don't think he'll make the Final Four because, like you said, he is, unlike Jimmy, to actually give him a compliment for once, not mentally strong, and he does, have a tendency to choke. And, I said he was probably going to try to take Ross out at Talladega or the Roval. I would bet at least half odds that he'll take himself out doing it. So, he's a threat, but I don't think that he'll make the Final Four. And obviously, the smart money's on Chase. I mean, he's, at this point, I think, fairly overwhelmingly the best driver so far. And if the discussion is who's going to end up being the best driver of the season, I don't think there's really much question on that he is going to be the worthy driver. But we all know this system and, who is the worthy champion are 2 very different things. A lot of bad things can happen. A lot of luck can go a wrong way. And even if, you throw out like all the possible things that happen in the first 9 races, the fact that everything is just winner take all and only the last race really matters, just that fact alone, makes it a thing where you can't like count on it, where it's a thing where, it's absolutely going to happen or, something like that. But he's the favorite for sure by a good margin. There's not really any reason to think otherwise. I obviously hope, as a Kyle Larson supporter, that he makes a run. I'm hoping for that Tony Stewart 2011 type thing from him, where the beast from last year comes out again. I'd love to see it. Love to see a battle between him and Chase for the win, for the title. But I don't know. I just his season's been underrated so far, but I still can't say that there's been many signs of him showing the kind of top tier speed that he really needs to challenge Chase. But again, he does have a lot of good tracks in this Chase that kind of favor him. So we'll just have to see. And the last guy that I think is just a serious threat to win the championship would be probably Ryan Blaney. In the same way that I kind of feel like this is a 2016 Johnson year for Hamlin, I'm actually kind of getting mini 2020 Chase vibes from Blaney this year. Now, obviously, I'm not trying to claim that this is anywhere near as good of a season for him as that, not in the slightest, but I have a kind of a vibe. I've been kind of having this feeling for a while that, if Ryan Blaney made the Chase, he would be a real threat, because this just, I can't base it on anything, I guess, factual or just logic, but this just kind of feels to me like the kind of thing where the world kind of shits on him for like 2/3 of the year, and everything seems to go against him, but then like there can be this sudden turnaround in luck at the end, and like we can actually see what he's capable of. And there are some, again, good tracks for Ford and Penske in this, I think, more than have been most of the season so far. And in fact, I'm even going to go so far as to say, I already did it in our little predictions game like that we do in the chat. I'm tentatively predicting Blaney to win the championship. I'm going to be that bold. I'm not saying I think that it's a definite, or that Chase isn't even the logical favorite, but I'm making that prediction right now. And I think Logano will make the Final Four, but I don't think he's going to win the title. I think he'll do kind of what he's done in each of these recent times that he's made the Final Four. He'll just do the bare minimum. I think he'll either win one race here at the most opportune time, or he'll just be that fourth guy that makes it in on points while everything else is crumbling else around him. After that, I don't see anybody that's a major threat. That's my handful of guys that can legitimately compete.
Well, so I want to actually jump off your stuff about Ryan Blaney, because I agree that he has been good enough to win a championship if A, his luck turns around, and B, he can just step it up even 5-10% more. I think he could be a real threat. And, in that vein, the other person that I think is a very long shot sleeper is William Byron. And the reason I say that is because he has been just comically unlucky this year to a ridiculous degree, that he has only 5 top 10 the whole season. He gets involved in every wreck. His pit crew screws him. He gets bitten by the damaged vehicle policy, and I think he's still been running relatively well most of the time. So I think if his luck turns around and he can string together a number of 4th to 8th place finishes, he could, I think, find himself in the round of 8 at least, if not the Final Four. Now, I'm not saying I expect that, but I do think people are sleeping on him just because of his results being so poor.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and also you could probably say the same thing about Tyler Reddick, in that, we saw a tweet saying that Reddick and Austin Dillon have the same average finish, which is true, but it's Reddick is obviously way faster and has much more opportunity to win his way through the playoffs. And especially with the Roval, if he could easily win there and get to the round of 8, and then from there, who knows? So, yeah, I'll take Reddick and Byron as the two dark horses that could make the Final Four.
Yeah, I didn't want to. Yeah. I didn't mean to diss Reddick at all. As a driver, talent-wise, he absolutely has the potential to be a Final Four driver. But I just think that the equipment deficiency is going to be too much for him to overcome.
Yeah, it's hard to say exactly what to make of Reddick's chances. But top 5 or so talent in the series, if not top 3 at this point. I just don't see him really getting that far in the playoffs with RCR as long as he's there. If the stars align for him, that could easily happen. Wouldn't think he would be a serious threat to win the championship, but he could get to Phoenix. Byron, I've harped on and on about how he's having this incredibly unlucky season as far as top 10s go. It's just comical at this point. And it seems people are acting like he's been, I don't know, Dale Jr. in 2009 or something or whatever. I can't even. There's no even way to just describe how unlucky he's been this summer at this point. He's still not at the bottom of the luck chart, because he early in the season was actually very lucky, probably in the races he won, and then some of those others like Richmond, where he finished much better than he ran for most of the race. Yeah, it's hard to say if that'll be able to sort itself out. I do think that a lot of times in the playoffs, we'll see guys go through these bad regular season stretches and then just kind of magically pick it back up again. And Hendrick especially has always kind of done that, going back to Johnson and Chase in 2020. It's it doesn't matter how bad they are at various points or how unlucky they are in the regular season. It seems like once the playoffs start, they just start finishing in the top 10 all the time and running up front. I think back to your Hamlin comparison to Johnson 2016, I don't really see that, but I think I will say that, and this might be a bit of a hot take, but he has had, I think, And this kind of goes in line with a new statistic that I've been developing over this past week of EARP, which is Equipment Adjusted Average Running Position Score. And I've also been doing kind of season-by-season rankings of a lot of drivers. And what this statistic will do is basically it just multiplies the running position score that I give, and it multiplies it by the equipment strength. And what this does for a lot of drivers is it really kind of equalizes their their performance in terms of how good the equipment was. And Hamlin, I found this, he has not been really anywhere near as good in a lot of the recent seasons as it seems. But then this year, it's been the opposite. His 2019 was actually worse than his 2017 and 2018 in EARP. I'm not saying that's a worse season, but and the last two were a bit better. And between that and his pass differential score, all his passing numbers, I would say it's been a more impressive season for him as a driver than a lot of the past couple where he was very track position dependent. So that's kind of my hot take with him. Is it's not his best season in recent memory, but I think it's the most where he has been the one kind of outperforming what his team has given him, as opposed to just being handed good track position all the time. So I don't really know what that's going to mean going forward, but just kind of my hot take on him.
Yeah, I also wanted to say I do have Byron making the round of 8, and I do agree that in a sense he is kind of someone that is getting overlooked just because of the luck factor that, just making sure something there, that because of that, but I still wouldn't just like say he's just a certain Final Four pick or someone I think is going to win the championship. It would be pretty funny if he did and had like 12 or 13 top 10s the whole season, which would be like by far the least. But, none of us here really care about that because, that's fairly meaningless. And the other guy, he's not in the Vegas, I think, a contender. I wanted to say, and I said that I'm a Kyle Larson supporter in a sense, Alex Bowman is actually my favorite contending driver, or driver that's in the chase, after Corey LaJoie, who I would say is my number one favorite. But the equator would have to crack or the earth fall in for him to win the championship. So I'm putting my realistic hopes into Larson on that front. And again, also because, I don't like Chastain quite as much as I do them, but, I would be shocked again if he makes the Final Four. He just screams pretender to me. And and I respect Chase. I don't have anything against him. But, he's Larson's main rival and his teammate. I can't just say, just like it's the opposite for Ryan, that, I'm pulling for him in that respect. But I won't have a problem if he wins, especially considering that he's been the best driver this season.
Yeah. Yes, I would definitely have to say, just because of what we know he's capable of, that Larson is kind of the second most likely, or Chase's biggest threat, I guess you could say. Actually did predict in our game that Logano would win it. I guess part of that is kind of trying to hopefully work the reverse jinx magic, because I do not it would leave me very cold, kind of. He hasn't really dominated a whole lot this year at all, and he's just not a guy I'm a big fan of, even if he's not my least favorite. But just kind of has a lot of that sort of 2018 type of feel where people are overlooking him, and it just seems kind of wide open if one or two things go his way. And of course, how good Penske has been on those flat tracks like Phoenix, it just obviously Larson, I mean, we've kind of been expecting it all season. When is he really going to turn it on and just go on a tear like he did last year? Of course, the parity's better. The races are more unpredictable. It just hasn't happened yet, but it's not like the speed hasn't been there. So I'm absolutely still kind of worried about potential for Larson to really just show everyone up again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think also part of it is that this car, like, it suits Chase better and it suits Larson less, at least so far. Like, I mean, that may change as time goes along and this car, like, evolves, but that's also a big role part of it, obviously. As far as Logano goes, I mean, it'd be annoying if he won the title, but it definitely wouldn't be as bad as it was in 2018, where, again, he was, he was the sixth best driver probably in 2018, and you could at least make a case, even if it's a stretch, for him possibly being the second best, if you're just looking at results and nothing else. So, I mean,
well,
it's
even in my metrics, but
at least it's less egregious.
I would not personally have him as the second best driver, in spite of what ETDR says. I think I would take Blaney over him. I would probably take Chastain and Larson over him, but fifth, I mean, that's not a stretch at all. Maybe even fourth. But yeah, it would. The difference between this and 2018, obviously, is in 2018 you had three guys who just dominated the season, who would have most years been the number one favorite. Maybe a bit of a stretch to put Truex there with Harvick and Busch, but Harvick and Busch both probably had the best seasons of their career that year, and then Truex having at that point in time, a quote unquote down year for this whole reign of terror in the mid to late 2010s, and that was with a Furniture Row team that was shutting down. So there's nobody like that this year. Even Chase this year, I would not say has been as dominant as any of those guys were that year. So it's like probably 6 or 7 drivers who could win the championship, and I would just be like, okay, not a huge crime.
Well, speaking of not a huge crime, there's one driver I also want to bring up, which will probably not make people happy, but that's Kevin Harvick. Because, the shit show at Daytona made people forget that he had won 2 consecutive races before then and has generally been running a lot better than he was early in the season. And it makes me wonder if Stewart-Haas found something. More accurately, if Rodney Childers found something to make their cars better. And I know, do I think he's going to win the championship? Hell no. But I could see him sneaking into the Final Four if he survives Talladega and, other people get wrecked out of that. I could see him getting to the round of 8 and then, pointing his way in from there. The Roval does not favor him, so that might be a good way to knock him out. But I don't know. I think people are just kind of. I think like the NBC crew is hyping him like, oh, he's one of the championship favorites now, right after he won the second race in a row, which is of course ridiculous. But I also think he's not completely out of it either.
Yeah, I wanted to say somehow I actually forgot about him. Unbelievably, I did. Like, I literally forgot about him. But I'll just, now that you've brought him up, I'll just say the eye test says that, he's probably like not a Final Four driver. Like, he's not on that level speed-wise. But to parlay on what you said, I do remember back in July, like Rodney Childers, I think it was right around the time of Nashville, saying that we're releasing the hounds now. That, like he was hinting that they had found something. And even though, like, his Michigan win was, pretty lucky, and to maybe a lesser extent his Richmond one, he has been, as much as I hate to say it, a top 10 driver for sure, at least in the last 2 months. And, just my native skepticism says that, that I can't help but have this belief, like, that these, like, people that, and these guys will testify to it, that, guys I dislike, that I have this feeling like they're always going to have things somehow go their way. And, sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. But I just had this feeling now, like I actually thought Kevin Harvick might be done winning races after last year and that I wasn't going to have to deal with that anymore. But, well, here we are. Like, it's it's hard for me not to have this belief that the guy is just immortal, that he's never going to go away, that he's still going to be plaguing us at 55 years old, winning races and contending or whatever, and I sure as hell hope not, but I have picked him to make the round of 8, but not the round of 4, but he could if things go his way, but I do think a lot of things objectively will have to go his way for that to happen, but believe me, now that you've brought him up, my butt's puckered about it for certain. I can't lie.
My bad.
Well, no. I mean, that's fair.
All likelihood, the second round will probably take him out, especially if he forgets to turn at the Roval again. Chase just needs to get in his rearview mirror. I think, he's probably not. I don't think he has enough playoff points to be like a real serious threat unless he is incredibly consistent, or if he just completely turns it on like Stewart in 2011. It's just very unlikely. I think there are 5 drivers I will say you can pretty much rule out, though. There's 5 drivers in the playoffs who are not in the top 16 in ETDR, although that's including part-time drivers also, because Kurt Busch and AJ Allmendinger are both. Allmendinger's 18th, okay. But Chase Briscoe, Daniel Suarez, Alex Bowman, Austin Cindric, and Austin Dillon, I think, are the 5 drivers we can all safely say have pretty much no chance unless there's, all 11 of the other drivers get retroactively penalized over something and are out of the playoffs.
Yeah, that reminds me.
And I think everybody else has a greater than 0 chance.
Yeah, isn't Cindric, I think, 27th, the lowest one in ETDR?
Dillon actually is.
Oh, yeah, Dillon, well, yeah.
Both Austins are right next to each other, 26th and 27th.
Yeah.
I would not say their seasons have been that bad, but they're probably first-round exits, if not the second-round exits.
Well, and Ryan, it's kind of cool, actually, the way that ETDR lines up with the odds that Vegas is giving, because the 5 drivers you just mentioned are the 5 drivers with by far the longest odds to win the title. So that's cool that ETDR is kind of predicting, at least in this case, predicting who has no chance, regardless of what their points or average finish would say. So yeah, those 5 drivers are basically hopeless.
I'm surprised at how much the odds are not really solely on results. Like Hamlin having the 3rd best odds, I guess part of that could just be because he's a big name, but
I think those bookies, those bookies in Vegas are pretty smart. I think they are able to look through the results fundamentalism and actually realize how well drivers run and all that. So, because they're putting their money where their mouth is. So that's why I tend to look at these things, because there's actually an incentive to get it right rather than just hot takes and narratives. So
yeah, it's a shame that they can't talk about their work so that they can come on Twitter to praise us, but whatever.
Right. Yeah.
The other thing is those 5 drivers are also just there's a massive gap between them and everybody else in ETDR, because, like I said, it's like the 10 or 11 guys from second on back, and one of those guys is Kurt Busch, so he came out, but all the way back to Harvick in 14th, there's 21-point gap between Harvick and Logano in second, and then a 13-point gap from Harvick to Briscoe, who is 17th. So I think that's pretty much where you draw the line. I think 4 out of those 5 guys just mentioned are going to be the 4 first-round exits, and then one of them out in the second round.
Probably so, because the thing is, even if one of them were to win a race in the first round by some dumb luck in advance, they don't have the consistent enough speed to run up front and get stage points and all that to continue advancing. I think it just, the only way one of them could sneak into the round of 8 is if, like, the other 15 drivers get taken out at Talladega and they win, like Austin Dillon did yesterday. I think that's the only way something like that could happen.
Well, I could see something like it's Briscoe or Suarez, they could probably win at the Roval. But
oh yeah, that's true. I forgot about that. But
yeah,
they have to get to that round first. Yeah.
Yeah, just the odds are not in favor of it, and you can pretty much rule all those guys out of having any shot at the title.
Yep. Well, now that we've talked about the playoffs at length, do you want to just quick talk about Darlington and what we think is going to happen there?
Yeah. I guess since I was kind of just going on a couple minutes ago about how I think he's going to wake up now for the playoffs and really show a lot of what he did last year, I guess I'm picking Kyle Larson to win Darlington. He's never won there, right? But like he should have 2 or 3 wins there. It's one of his best tracks. It's just seems like the perfect opportunity for him to just kind of make a statement and prove that he's going to be one of the top title contenders again this year. So that's who I'm going with.
Yeah, I'm kind of torn between either Elliott or Hamlin. I think it's going to be one of those two, or Larson, but probably one of those 3. And whatever happens, I'm just excited to have a race that will almost certainly be decided on the track naturally with no BS, and it's a nice long 4-hour race. It's pretty much, after the last month or so of both wacky races that are too short and other things, it's nice to have just a regular classic NASCAR race to start the playoffs.
Yeah, for my take, as far as the race in general goes, I think it'll be all right, but probably not nearly as good as the spring race. Like this race tends to, I like the tradition of it, and I like the concept of it, the way that it's similar to the 600, and that it is kind of an endurance test, and maybe we'll see more of that this year with this new car, like we did with the 600. So I like that aspect of it in the long races and kind of the novelty of it that we don't normally see these days, but it's probably going to be kind of dull. But I like what Adam said, there's also some value in that, and that maybe we won't actually have some kind of like crap that we've been having the last month, especially at Daytona, where we actually get a quote-unquote fair result. But as far as but I don't think it's going to be bad, just not just great either. As far as who I think will do well, I think Larson will certainly contend, might lead part of the race. But as far as I think who's going to win it, I think that Elliott is going to be the one making the statement that he's going to come out of the gates hot. This is a pretty good track for him. And I think that he's extra motivated this year. I think there's an extra fire in him that I see. Kind of a glint in his eye, I think, after last year. Like he really wants to prove that he's, if not the best or top dog at Hendrick, at least 1A, Yeah. And so there's that. And I don't necessarily think he's going to win, but I am looking for Truex to be really strong here because not only is Darlington one of his best tracks, but I think after what's happened to him, he's going to have a fire lit under his ass. I think a lot of people will probably think that he's not going to do well because of that, but I think he's going to be very fast because of it. And I think if it's not Chase, like something could always happen to Chase. If something happens to him, I'm saying Truex is 1B favorite.
I can kind of see the rest of Truex's season going one of 2 ways, which is either he just, decides to really turn it on now and say, fuck it, I got nothing to lose, or he will just be like, why do I even give a shit the rest of the year and just completely tank? Mm-hmm. As far as non-playoff drivers, though, Eric Jones also has to be a sleeper. Great track for him, maybe his best track. And he was good there in the spring. But it's also pretty hard to believe Chase has never won at Darlington. Should have won 2 races there in 2020. Like Adam said, it's great to have another kind of endurance type of race, even if I think Darlington, the track is a bit overrated just due to all the nostalgia, rose-colored glasses. But yeah, I at this point, since there's so few 500 or more mile races left, I look forward to this. I don't understand why they moved the throwback away from it into the spring race. Frankly, Darlington probably should only have one race, and it should be this. Yeah, excited for Sunday. Probably going to miss about an hour of it doing my fantasy football draft, but it'll be a good one.
Oh man, don't
Yeah,
you're
just
one of those guys. Oh, don't tell me. No, oh man, I didn't know that. You had to ruin yourself for me. I'm like, come on, man. I'm kidding. You know, I don't like these fantasy football guys. Or at least a stereotype. But you know, I know you're not one of those guys. But you know, I'm just finding humor in it.
But you know, anyway, Jake, I just to touch on what you were saying about well, both of you actually, is that I think I agree that Darlington is not a particularly exciting track as far as like on track battles and you know and passing and driving through the field and all that stuff. And you know, like they always say, you're racing the racetrack, and I would not like that. You know, I would not want most races to be like that. But I think for 2 races a year, it's kind of a fun novelty to have, you know, this track that's just so on edge, and it's like if you make one mistake, you're in the wall. I think that's kind of cool. But I do agree that like the nostalgia makes people think Darlington is better than it is, because it's really an average track, and if it didn't have the novelty factor, I probably wouldn't even like it very much, if I'm being completely honest. So
Oh no, I agree
you know,
with that.
it comes at the right time in the schedule. You know, after we had Daytona and Watkins Glen and you know the Indy Road Course a few races before that, it comes at the right time where we just want a nice, straightforward race, even if it's a bit boring.
Yeah. No, I mean, obviously, me being from where I am, I have a bit more of a built-in fondness for it. But I agree with the aspect. It's more about the track itself than it is the racing. I mean, you're never going to see like a barn burner event here where there's lots of passing or whatever, because the racing groove is just so narrow, and it is just more of an endurance test than it is about like cars against each other driving. But you know, like it got an unfair rap like about 20 years ago when you know the Brian France administration stepped in, and you know we all know how big of a deal it was when they took first the Labor Day date away from Darlington, and then they took away the second date, and then they were talking about just not racing there anymore, which would have been awful. But thankfully, it did survive, and it might not deserve 2 races now, but it certainly needs to be on the schedule in some respect, and at least have this race that we have here, the 500-mile one. And it was one of the best decisions that they ever made, coming back not only to having the 500 here at Labor Day, but having it be the kickoff for the chase, which is a really cool idea. Like the race actually that, you know, like it's actually kind of interesting that this week, the week after this, we have Kansas, which has been moved back several weeks. You know, we're going to get to, but of course, that's kind of, but we'll have time to talk about that next week, of course. And obviously, everything is building up to the Bristol race, which you know we're all hoping and expecting to be a barn burner. But for now, like we kind of got to get through a couple of races that I think are going to be okay, but not just amazing, and see what happens. So I guess that's what I have to say about it.
I think kind of Darlington, without the whole novelty of being this historic track with all the nostalgia, it would basically be viewed sort of like Dover, as kind of race against the track. It's easy to get swept up in something, and you know, racing though isn't always great. It'll have great races from time to time, but it's not like, don't go into it like, I don't know, Homestead, where it's just a great race every year.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I think that kind of covers about everything.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, there was one thing I was going to talk about earlier, is right around the point we were talking about Logano, but I just never could remember what it was. Must not have been that big a deal or important. So I'll just say a couple more things and wrap it up here. First off, you know I got to do it. I have to give a shout out to my boy Cody Ware for finishing 6th at Daytona. Yeah, it was because a lot of other stuff happened, and he kind of just survived and trolled his way into it. But I mean, still, guy to get that good a finish in that kind of car, and like he's been a punching bag for a lot of people for a long time, and I'm not saying it's completely unwarranted, but hey, I admire the man and like his sort of redemption arc that he's had. Like, I'm not going to get into the details of like what he's been through and go through all that. If you want to, you can look it up. But I admire the guy. Like, he's got a unique personality. Like, he's the only guy, let's face it, on Twitter that actually says anything interesting and actually posts it himself. Like, he's not afraid to be different. And, yeah, he races for the slumlord of NASCAR, which isn't so great, but I mean, come on. I love the story, the man, the myth, the legend, Cody Ware, just continuing to turn heads. So congrats to him on that. What was that? I thought somebody said something. All right, yeah, that was just some background noise, I guess. But anyways, and the other thing that I wanted to bring up is tomorrow and Wednesday is a fairly big day for me. And the reason for that, for people that haven't kept up, this month was when we got the big revival of North Wilkesboro Speedway in western North Carolina. Obviously older fans, that are listening to this know all about it, and all about the history of North Wilkesboro. But we went on long enough, so I'm not going to like go through the whole history of it here for like the younger people here. But it's a very historic place that got like I just said about what almost happened to Darlington 20 years ago did happen to North Wilkesboro like 25 years ago. It just got the axe from NASCAR and got completely, all for Texas Motor Speedway, which ironically is now in danger of being bulldozed in what possibly the same year that NASCAR returns to North Wilkesboro in a couple of years. But it was a huge blow to this area. I'm not going to say exactly where I live, but I don't live too far from the track. And, I know people from around the area. And it was a big deal, and it really hurt people a lot when NASCAR left and basically turned their backs on the track and the community. And I really cannot even tangibly enunciate or really state what a big deal it is and just how much of a buzz there is around this event or events that we've been having this month and this whole thing. And there's a lot of people to thank for this happening, obviously, but chief among them is Dale Earnhardt Jr. Like, we can mince words, say whatever. If Dale Earnhardt Jr., if it was not for him, this would not be happening. This track would not be coming back. But he not only, the thing that kind of kicked it off, obviously, was the iRacing like laser scanning thing in 2019 where they cleaned up the racetrack, and he personally did some of that work so that they could get it on iRacing. And then they did actually, like during the pandemic of 2020, the virtual races that were televised from the virtual North Wilkesboro track. But now the real life thing is coming back, and he and Marcus Smith and all the other people involved in this, they deserve all the credit in the world. All the people that put the money into this project, that put the passion into it, that cared about it. And of course, all the fans that have showed up. Like, they began this month with a modified race, like the kind you see at Bowman Gray and all that. Like, it's called the Smart Car Tour, Smart Modified Tour, or whatever. And they were absolutely just packed out, not a seat in the place, 60,000 people all crammed into one spot. I think it might have been a weekday or weeknight or weekend, but whatever the case, it was just a real spectacle, and it's been one the whole month. And they're capping it off with the biggest event, which is tomorrow. They're having the Cars Late Model Sportsman Tour, which that's not NASCAR affiliated, but it's something akin to NASCAR, like a minor league series race, where they have sportsman cars like you see, again, at your local short track every Saturday night. And Dale Earnhardt Jr. is in the field. He's going to be driving the number 3 Sundrop car. as a tribute to the last time he raced at North Wilkesboro in the late 90s when he ran a number 3 Sundrop car. Not a lot of other big names in it, but, we do have fake Dale Jr. Chad McCumbee of ESPN, the 3 film fame, Carson Quapple, obviously, what's his name? I can't even remember. Yeah, that's it. And Corey Heim, who's been making some waves, obviously in the top 3 series recently, is also going to be there. Other than that, don't really know much about the drivers that are in the field, but hey, it doesn't really matter. Junior's in it. It's going to be a big event, and if anyone happens to live reasonably close to it, I think, last I checked, there are still a few tickets available for it. So if you live like in the vicinity of it and you want to go to racexr.com or Race Experience or whatever it is and see if you can snag a ticket. But it's close to a sellout, and I'm going to be there. This is going to be only the second time that I've been able to see Dale Earnhardt Jr. race in person. Like, I saw him practice in 2014, like the day before. He actually won the Martinsville race in October of that year, but I've never actually seen him race a race live. And I really wanted to go to the Xfinity race at Martinsville this year because I felt like that was going to be my final chance to do it, and I didn't get to, and I was pretty down about that. But then I heard about this, and I'm over the moon about it, especially since since COVID, I think we've all been struggling and having things where we haven't been able to do a lot of the things that we've wanted to do, and life's been kind of limited in a lot of ways. But next 2 nights, provided the weather holds out, going to be making history, and I'm going to be there. I'm looking forward to it so much. I've been waiting. I got tickets for it 2.5 months ago. Going to be right near before the start-finish line. I'm going on too long about this, of course, but I'm just so excited about it. So
we're all happy for you, man.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. Tomorrow night is going to be, is going to be just qualifying. They're going to have, like at any short track, like other divisions, like other small-time racing deals tomorrow, and qualifying for the Cars Tour race tomorrow evening, and then the actual race will be at Wednesday. So, if you're looking for which night to attend, if you just, only have one night, then it should be Wednesday, because that's when the race is going to happen. Hope the weather holds out. It's not looking too good for tomorrow, but it's looking okay for Wednesday, so we'll just have to see on that. But anyways, I'll end that little monologue there. It's a huge deal. Thanks again to all the people that have supported that cause, that have made it possible for us to go back there. And if all goes well, we'll probably get a truck race there in 2024. So here's hoping on that. So I guess that does it for me. You guys got anything else you want to add? Or
BJ McLeod finished 7th. Just another shout out to that.
Oh yeah, have to give a shout out to the old Beach.
And Landon 4th.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's about it.
Anything from you, Adam?
No, I think we covered everything.
Well, good stuff then. Enjoyed the show. So
see you next week.
Yep.
Yep. Have a good night, everyone.
Yep. Thank all you guys for listening. This was episode 13 of the TRC podcast. The show is Ryan, the co-host, head analyst, and statistician. If you want to see some more of his work, I can text for him. Just follow him on Twitter at RJM Analytics, I believe. On there, you can see more of his stuff. We also retweet some of his material on the TRC podcast account on Twitter. And thanks for all your support and for helping us through this rough time recently. I know it's been patchwork a lot recently, but we've been working through it, through all the technical difficulties and people, having to deal with stuff in their life and being off. But we're hoping that it's going to be going more smoothly soon. Thanks to everyone that supported us through that. Appreciate all of it. Appreciate all you listening, and we'll see you next time.